to you from Portland, Oregon. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. ELGL engages the brightest minds in local government. I'm Kirsten Wyatt, a fellow at the Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University, building a new peer learning network called the Digital Service Network, and I'm also the ELGL co-founder. Today, I'm joined by Gabriela Solis from the Harvard Kennedy School Government Performance Lab's Alternative 911 Emergency Response Program. Gabriela, welcome to GovLove.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Today, we'll talk about the new ways that local governments are engaging and triaging 911 calls and overcoming entrenched legacy systems. This episode is produced in partnership with our friends at Code for America. You can sign up for the Code for America Summit in Washington, D.C. on May 16th and 17th at codeforamerica.org. Use the promo code GovLove for 10% off the ticket price. Code for America is a passionate, mission-driven team who believes government at all levels can and should work well for everyone. All right, let's get started with a lightning round. What is your most controversial, non-political opinion?
I think for me, it has to be that voice texting is the superior form of communication.
Oh, wow. So actually recording it, not like the voice to text.
Yes, like the voice note feature on,
Okay.
it's on not notes, it's on WhatsApp and the like iMessage function now. I love that stuff.
And so what was the turning point that made you believe that this is the superior form of communication?
Yeah, I think so. My friends and I, we use what we call podcasts. Like we'll send each other 5 to 7 minute long voice notes.
Oh, wow.
This
Okay.
what happened during my day. And it's just so much more efficient than sending a bunch of texts. And you can just do it while you're walking your dog, while you're cooking, doing other things. It's, I think, very an efficient way to get a lot of information out at once.
I appreciate that. All right. What is a food that most people like, but you do not?
Yeah, I think for me, it's eggplant in general. Everyone
Ooh.
around me loves eggplant. And something about the taste and sort of the texture just doesn't really jive with me. But I'm giving it other opportunities still.
Is it really is it all types of food? What about like in a curry, or what about like breaded as like a Parmesan, like
Yeah, it's just
across the board?
yeah, across the board. I always notice it.
All right. And then what was the first music purchase that you made independently, and what format was it on?
Yeah, this one I had to really dig deep into the memories. But I think for me, the first thing I bought with my own money that was music related was the Beatles anthology DVD box set.
Wow.
Yes, and it was in 5th grade. I remember I saved money for months. I was like helping in 5th grade. I was helping the third grade teacher like tutor the third graders or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me just like a Tower Records gift card.
Oh,
And that was
wow.
like, oh my God, I finally have enough money to buy this DVD box set. And yeah, I went to Tower Records and I bought that.
Had you been like at that point a long time, or at least 11-year Beatles
Yes.
fan, or was
Yes.
this just like out of the blue?
No, I was a longtime Beatles fan at that point. My dad is a big classic rock fan, so that's what I grew up listening to, and love the Beatles to this day.
Do you have a particular song that is your song, or you and your dad's song?
Man, there's so many good ones. I love the song like "Love Me Do" is one that
Mm-hmm.
always gets me in a good mood. My favorite Beatles song is "Something."
Okay.
It's the perfect love song. Yeah, but I could go on and on, but they're amazing.
Love it. And what a fun walk down memory lane. So let's dive in though and talk about your incredible work, but get us started by sharing your career path with our listeners.
Yeah, of course. So I think it's important for me to start sort of where I was born and raised, because I think it has a pretty big impact on my career path. But I was born and raised in East Los Angeles. I'm a very proud Angelino. And I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrants and was actually the first in my generation of my family to go to college. So I think there was a lot of sort of navigating and potentially might have to do with me flip flopping careers in the middle of my education. But I started volunteering at local nonprofits that serve the unhoused in the Los Angeles area around when I was like 16 through my high school and in a local church. And then from there, I really just derived an interest in figuring out how I could help people who were maybe down on their luck or were suffering, were just experiencing suffering, I think, generally. And then from that experience, I really moved on to continue working in direct service for most of my career. So I was doing case management at a day center that would serve food and provide showers for folks experiencing homelessness. I also ran a shelter for college students who were experiencing homelessness. Also, let's shout out Bruin Shelter at UCLA. They're still running and operating. And then also did sort of like resident management at permanent supportive housing units, actually on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. And I just had a lot of different experiences in direct service. And through that time became really frustrated with just how the service systems were working. And I just really, really wanted to learn more about who was making the decisions and sort of who was making the rules and why things seemed so absurd at the time. I was very lost.
Yeah.
Within that. And then one of my mentors at the time suggested, she was like, have you thought about like thinking about policy school or thinking about public policy? At the time, I got to say, I wasn't at all very politically motivated. I was not very well informed about government or how government worked or policy and all of that stuff. So I was like, yes, that's the thing I have to go learn. And I decided to then pursue a master's in social work, which is honor sort of my work in direct service that I love. And then also a master's in public policy, where I got to learn much more about how you make the rules and how you develop government programs and how government in general just affects our communities and the opportunities that people have. So I went to grad school at UCLA. They have a really neat dual degree program there where I was able to do both masters in 3 years. And then after that, I found myself at the Government Performance Lab post-grad, which was literally my dream job. I can't believe that this job exists. I'm still in awe. But I get to now help government solve some of the same problems that I was so frustrated with when I was a social worker and doing case management. And that's just been super fulfilling for me, I think, both professionally and personally.
What a great path to have actually done the work and then you decide to go back to school and then be able to then continue to do the work. Is that something you would recommend for our listeners who maybe are working in direct service right now and are thinking about their path forward and what it means to continue to solve some of these, very tricky public challenges we face?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I rely on a daily, like even probably on an hourly basis, on my
Hmm.
experience in direct service. Because what I do in my job now is we really try to assess what the challenges that governments are going through or having to deal with are, and then recommend solutions that then we then try to implement. And I think so much of my perspective comes from, and my ability to help the governments comes from having just realistic expectations of how the work
Right.
is on the ground. Because I remember being a case manager and sort of having to see my clients. Like you would have back to back hourly sessions, trying to get people through their paperwork, trying to call a million shelters for housing and see what happened. And then I had to do my case notes. And then I had to go have supervision with my manager or whatever. And it's just like your day is jam packed, it's full, people are stressed out,
Hmm.
the job is really heavy. And I think a lot like me remembering and and grounding myself in that experience and is really helpful when I try to think about what are solutions to sort of make government programs or social service programs more effective, and make sure that they're working both for the folks in need, but also for the staff that we're hiring to do the work.
I love that because I think, especially with this push toward, innovation in government and data-driven government, there's sometimes a sense that you can just tinker with systems and not really know what it feels like to be in them and kind of be up to your elbows in, the work. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate the path that you've taken. Talk to us about the Government Performance Lab. What do you do? What should our listeners know?
Yeah, so the Government Performance Lab is a research and technical assistance organization that's based out of the Harvard Kennedy School up in Cambridge. And we support state and local governments across the country in designing and implementing solutions to a variety of pressing social problems. So we do work in the child welfare system, in housing and homelessness, with economic mobility work, and reforming government procurement systems. And obviously criminal justice, the team that I'm on. But we sort of run the gamut in those spaces. But I think put another way, we work super closely with our government partners to develop and test service reforms. And our main goal is to help governments build, I think, just more just and effective service systems. And alternative 911 emergency response is, I think, an example of how we're doing that.
All right, so let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about the Alternative 911 Emergency Response Initiative. Tell us what it is and the work you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. So I think at this point, most folks have heard something about alternatives to 911 emergency response and sending different folks to 911 calls. And I think in our work with governments, we've also heard from government staff across the country that they want to move away from police as the de facto response to 911 calls. And their voices, in addition to voices of community leaders and advocacy groups, are part of this national call to action to really reimagine our emergency crisis response system. And that includes sort of why are we sending police to such calls? Why are we using ambulances for these other calls, right? Like, what is fire going on? I think it's really an overhaul and taking a step back and thinking about, are we using our emergency services in the most efficient way and really getting people the response that they need at the time that they're having the crisis? So getting people the response that they need at the right time. And through our alternative 911 emergency response initiative, the GPL helps governments respond to this call to action. So I think in practice, what you can imagine is that we work with governments who are investing in these alternative dispatch models that divert 911 calls that are eligible, usually nonviolent, with low safety risks, to community-based health-centered response teams. And those teams, I mean, they're made up of a variance of professionals. So it really depends on who the government wants to staff, depending on what types of calls they want to divert. But they're made up typically of specially trained professionals who have core skills in crisis de-escalation. And their main mandate is to de-escalate and connect those in crisis to supportive services that will hopefully reduce the likelihood of future crises and future reliance on the 911 system. And I think what we're seeing or we're excited about is that sending these teams rather than armed law enforcement does have the opportunity to create more equitable outcomes for those in crisis, because you're sort of fully stopping the opportunity for a person to get pulled into the criminal justice system, because you're reducing that interaction with police upfront for something that is non-criminal. And I think when we started working in alternative 911 emergency response, we really saw a disconnect. So despite a growing consensus among jurisdictions that alternative responses to 911 calls were needed and folks were excited about investing in this or thinking about it, governments are really struggling to invest in these efforts and implement the changes in a sustainable way. And that's where we help. That's where we come in. And what we're proud of our work being is that we provide governments that are developing or expanding unarmed emergency response teams with about 12 months of tailored coaching and pro bono technical assistance to really make sure that these governments create good foundations for meaningful change of their 911 response systems that allows them to pilot these teams, make sure that they're responding to calls well, and that folks in crisis are getting connected to the services that they need to.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that all of our listeners would agree that, this national call for change or reform in how calls are responded to is something that they're seeing in their communities as well. And I appreciate that you recognize that change is hard because this is a new way of doing things. And so you're not just out there talking in theory about why alternative response is important. You're actually doing the research and implementation for governments. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to us about how kind of this bigger picture concept that our listeners are going to, it's really resonating with them. How are you doing the work, and what are some examples that you can point to of how your work is impacting communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's helpful to frame that through this initiative. Now we've worked with in pretty intensively with 17 jurisdictions across the United States, and we support them both on the planning piece. So some folks that we work with are just starting to think about alternative response. They're getting into that planning headspace where they're trying to figure out what budget do I need, what's an implementation timeline, who are the stakeholders that I need to bring to the table, what do my teams need to look like, what are the types of calls that I want to divert to. So that's one piece. Another piece that we do is we help folks with implementation. So that's like we get governments who sort of have a pretty solid plan, but they're very close to launching. So now they have to figure out sort of the really sticky stuff, like how, for example, some governments want to make sure that their teams are plugged into the 911 sort of radio system in the same way that fire, police, and EMS are. So figuring out that really sticky stuff of like what radio channel should people be on, what training do people need to make sure that they know how to de-escalate, they know when to call for backup if they need that type of thing. And then we're just started in the last year. We've been working folks now for in their expansion efforts. So I know we've seen governments or teams pop up across the United States who've now been operating for 1, maybe 2 years in a pilot, very small type of program where they're usually responding to calls in one neighborhood or in a limited set of hours. So governments are now coming to us too and saying like, okay, we've tested this. We feel like we have an understanding of this being a helpful resource. So we want to take this to another neighborhood, or we want to expand our hours, or we want to increase eligibility of calls, things like that. So that's how we're supporting governments at different stages. But the other piece of our work, other than the intensive work that we do, is that we host a community of practice where we meet monthly. So if there are government folks who are on listening to this who want to learn more about just our work in general and what governments are doing, we
Hmm.
host this community of practice, which is a sort of like a monthly learning series call that's open to any government staff who is thinking about exploring, potentially curious about, or planning and implementing a team of their own. We welcome them to join for these monthly calls where we bring together practitioners from across the United States to share about what are the challenges that they're working through, what progress have they made, um, and also just any decisions that they're making on program design.
Hmm.
We really try to create sort of like a safe space for folks to come share about their challenges. So those
Hmm.
I think are the two buckets of work that we have right now. But overall, I would say that our goal is really to help government partners successfully and hopefully more quickly work through just different important milestones to launch, improve, or expand their teams.
And what are the ways that a listener could, if they're just interested in that community of practice, How do they get involved with that? I mean, it seems like kind of the stepping stone or the gateway to what we'll talk about here in a minute
Sure.
of fully signing up and being part of your programming.
Absolutely. So the community of practice, you can find it on our website. If you just, I'm sure we'll probably link some links to this
Yep,
podcast. But
absolutely.
but if you just go on Google, sort of Google Government Performance Lab, Harvard Kennedy School, sort of alternatives to 911 response, we should pop up, and there's a button there that just says sign up for community of practice. And that's about it. And then you'll get the Zoom links for me in your inbox once a month.
Perfect. And we'll include that in the show notes. So if you're listening in your car, just head over to the show notes at elgl.org and we'll include those notes. So you launched your first cohort in September of 21. So tell us more about what you've seen happen since your first cohort launched.
Yeah. So we're super excited. So we about everything that our governments have been able to accomplish with the help, obviously, of all of our staff. It's not just me. We're sort of a team of 4 right now who are working on this. So shout out to the awesome A9er team too. But so we've had 4 of our jurisdictions have actually launched teams already that are being directly dispatched to 911 call centers. So we've supported Harris County, Phoenix, and Durham specifically. I wanted to call these folks out because of those 4, have already initiated expansion efforts.
Oh, wow.
So that's super exciting. They've been operating long enough where now they're getting ready to build on what they're seeing. And then in the next 6 months, we have another government that is launching, hopefully very soon. They're getting ready to release an RFP for a contracted provider to staff their teams, so a local community-based organization. And then 4 more are getting ready to expand their initiatives across the United States, which is also super exciting for us.
And so what does support look like? Like what could someone expect when you come in and begin working with them? What are some of the goals that you bring to the project?
Yeah. So our support comes in sort of 3 different buckets if you're getting some of our intensive coaching support. So the first is our one-on-one time with your GPL staff counterpart, right? So we assign a GPL staff person to every government to provide one-on-one support on really tangible tactical deliverables. So that can be things like helping governments select like a geographic location for their pilot that will increase impact of their teams. We also have done 911 call data analysis, for example, where we work with the 911 director and the managers there to comb through their data and figure out what are the types of calls that these teams could go out to. We've also worked on program eligibility requirements with governments where we help them work through usually larger work groups of different emergency response agencies and government stakeholders on agreeing on what are the exclusionary criteria, right? So like what is a call taker at a 911 center need to hear for that call to be ineligible for a response, right? Usually things like there's violence on the call, the person has a weapon, things like that. So we do just really tangible deliverables. I think the one that really brightens people's eyes is that we are also game to write things like RFPs, which we know can be
Oh, wow.
a lot of work. We also have helped our governments write job descriptions for their teams or interview questions, things like that. So we sort of are into the deep analysis type work, but also are happy to support on the things that most of our governments need to do that are just sort of take more time, and we're happy to work collaboratively on those. And then the second bucket that I think our governments really like too is that we share a lot of template materials and examples from peer governments who are doing this work. I think one of the benefits of having worked with so many jurisdictions at this point is that we sort of have a pretty robust library of examples that people can rely on. And one thing that we ask folks when they become part of our cohort and receive support is that they would be willing to share resources with other folks in the cohort. And usually what we've seen is that folks are super open to that. Obviously, it's like, I'll share my examples if I can get examples.
Of course,
um,
yeah.
so we have a lot of documents that usually aren't public for sort of people outside of the department. So you can imagine call decision trees for these teams, different protocols, training curriculum is another thing. We also have templates that were created by the GPL on how to do this 911 call for service analysis, for example, on data strategy plans. And then now, because we've written quite a few RFPs at this point, we have an RFP template. So if the government actually says, like, can I just bump this to my procurement team or something so they can write it, we can provide that team examples too. And then the last piece, which for me is one of the most exciting spaces that we coordinate, is that within the cohort, we invite all of our cohort points of contact, so sort of our partners that we're meeting with on a regular basis, to join a monthly call where we bring everyone together. And the main purpose of that call is just to workshop challenges with your peers. So people sort of raise their hand. They say, I'm going through this really sticky thing. I'm not sure how to think about it. Can we just talk through this? And can you all give me examples on how you've thought about it in your government? Which has been super super helpful. So we've workshopped things like dashboards. Like, what are you collecting for your dashboards? What are your key performance metrics? How are you changing your call taking operations? Sort of like runs the gamut. And we have the folks that join those calls are, you can imagine, like the Department of Behavioral Health Crisis Services Director and the 911 dispatch director from another jurisdiction. And sort of we have groups who have different experiences who are cross-pollinating ideas to some extent that I think at the end helps our governments produce much better program decisions.
I love it. And not just because, coming from one academic institution where I am at Georgetown to another, I think sometimes people can get the sense that, oh, these are just, this is like ivory tower like perspective, but you're really just getting in there and allowing governments to learn from each other, to share resources, and you're facilitating that and making it happen. And that's phenomenal. And it's helpful, and it's exactly what we hear all the time at ELGL that governments want, is that ability to templatize information, get real help, and then learn from each other. So I just applaud you for that, and for really doing something that's helpful and practical and useful.
Well, thank you. That's great feedback for us. And
So if someone's listening right now and they are excited, they're interested, and they're thinking to themselves, oh, my governing board would never go for this. Or on the flip side, if a governing board member is saying, oh, my staff would never buy into this. Talk to us about, like, what do governments need to approach you, or to work with you? Do you need a certain amount of political buy-in or staffing levels? What does it take to get things started?
yeah, so it's actually a pretty simple process on our end. We have, if you're interested in the community of practice, that's just you sign up online and you're welcome to join us. If you're interested in the cohort, more intensive support, we have a formal application process that actually opened up earlier this month. It's a super short online application, should only take people about 20 minutes. You only need one department to apply. Some folks have sort of joint applications with 2 to 3 departments, but that's not necessary. And the application is really for us to understand more about your program and what you might need support on. After that, we do interviews with key stakeholders and sort of just make sure that what we have to offer matches your needs. And then the one thing I'll say that I think people get tripped up on is that they feel like they have to have one certain model to receive support. Like there's a one size fits all, and there isn't. So we're more than happy to support program models that vary. So we've to date now have actually helped quite a range of government programs. So we've helped county-led programs that are staffing teams through an RFP process with a local community-based organization who's actually staffing the teams, and they're the ones who are responding to the 911 calls, with the county just managing the contract. We've also helped folks who are running more like a city-led program, where maybe the city created a brand new community safety department that is going to house a bunch of different diversion and violence prevention programs. And the city actually is going to hire folks as city staff to respond to these calls. We've also helped folks in that space. We've Another example is like programs in transition. I know cities and counties across the United States are actually looking at the current availability of response teams or mobile teams, and thinking about whether they can actually tweak the scope of some of those teams to be able to respond to 911 calls. So that's another thing that we're happy to support on. I don't think it has to be like a brand new, this like big initiative. And the last thing I'll say too is, or this the second to the last thing, is that we're super open to help governments think about 988 too, and how that is coordinating with 911 calls, and making sure that no matter where people are calling when they're in crisis, that they're getting an alternative response team. So we're helping governments think about that right now. But overall, so regardless of your program model, the things that we do look for in our applicants are just that the responder teams are staffed with unarmed responders is one big thing. That they have a goal at least to directly dispatch from 911 calls. So they're actually taking 911 calls and giving them to these teams. We also look for folks who have some sort of demonstrate cross-agency and community stakeholder collaboration, because these are just initiatives and programs that take a lot of work from different spaces in government. So making sure that folks have some healthy collaboration already is a big plus. And the last is that that they have a strong commitment to advancing equitable outcomes for communities of color and just other folks that have been disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. But those are sort of our four main buckets. But other than that, we're happy to support folks, and are happy to hear a pitch through the application too. I think we're pretty flexible on who we want to support.
And are there any technology requirements about the 911 technology systems that are being used? Like, do all governments that you work with have to use the same tools, or are you going to push them toward the same tools? Or are any types of systems, no matter how sophisticated, regionalized, or localized, can anything be used to work with you?
That's a great question. So we work with the tools and systems that our governments currently have or have procured, or with some folks that we work with are about to procure. They're sort of like going through a systems change. And I think what we've learned now is that no two emergency response systems is alike. So an important part of our work now has become taking the time to really understand each system's uniqueness and then build our support around that. Because I think without doing that, we'll fail in our goal of like really trying to help governments set up teams that are going to both address the unique needs of their folks in crisis, and then also make sense and work within their unique 911 and emergency response systems. So yes, we're open to any type of system, sort of like agnostic to technology. We just work patiently with our 911 director partners to learn the systems as fast as we can.
It seems like this gives you a greater ability to help governments move toward data-driven decision making in really looking at systems and looking at responses. So talk to us about how data plays a role in your work.
Oh yeah. So this is one of my favorite ways that we help governments. I think since I was introduced into the policy world, I just learned that so many of our governments we're just sitting on so much program data, and no one really uses it. So generally, I say that what we do through all of our work throughout the GPL is, I think, helping governments move away from just looking at a spreadsheet, clicking through a dashboard, sort of with like a compliance mindset, making sure that their reports are sent, and instead to look at their data, really learn how to identify important trends to see how things are changing. Ask yourself, have some hypotheses about why things are changing, hopefully, and then make a change to your operations based on that. I
Mm-hmm.
think when we see people switch their thinking about data around that, we feel super proud of ourselves and feel successful. But for example, within alternative response work and my team's work, we've actually run now with two of our governments what we call, it's like the equivalent of like a data performance management boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
where we take program managers and usually data analysts through a quick short crash course on how to best leverage their 911 program data or their 911 alternative response team program data to
Mm-hmm.
drive action. We also do a lot of work with governments who are just starting to set up their teams, and starting to think about, well, what are my key performance indicators? Who's going to collect what data? When should I be looking at my data? When should I be presenting my data and to who?
Mm-hmm.
And to help them plan in advance to make sure that just data and a data driven decision making approach is embedded and integrated into their program plan. If folks are curious, I'll do a pitch here. We have a case study on our website of some work that we did with Long Beach's 911 call data,
Mm-hmm.
where, and this is on our website, but you can read that for the deeper dive. But that was a super fun project that we did where we helped city leaders and their 911 manager use historic 911 data to understand the types of calls that could likely be safely sent to their community crisis response team and help
Mm-hmm.
them make decisions on sort of what types of calls they're going to send, what's eligibility criteria that they need that ultimately help them design their program. And that this team, the Long Beach team, is one of the teams that I mentioned earlier, that had launched. So we're super excited that they have teams on the ground now. I think they launched, depending on when you're hearing this, maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So we're super excited about that. Yeah.
And what a powerful way for you to help teams use data to explain change. It just seems like it's a way that they can take information and explain why response might look differently and why that's important.
Yeah. And Kirsten, if I can share too, one thing that we're doing also is helping our governments use data not only to look historically, but also to try to project into the future,
Mm,
how their teams might expand, which I know has been super exciting for us too to think about that. So we're currently helping one of our governments use their program, their historical program and staffing data to model how many 911 calls their team could potentially take on in the future. And also think about how many staff they might need to hire to accommodate different increases in call volume or fluctuations like that. So there's also space too for our governments to use their data to sort of um, try to tell the future a little bit and have a better plan around it too, which
right.
we've been pretty excited about.
For a listener who's hearing this, they're as excited as I am about the work you're doing, the opportunities you're offering. What's next? How do they apply to be in a cohort? I know we talked a little bit about the community of practice, but let's talk about the cohort application process. What should they know?
Yes. So please apply to be on the cohort. Our application is online. Like we mentioned, it closes May 15th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Time. No, I live in Los Angeles, so I'm used to saying Pacific Standard Time. I don't think that's the same in the East Coast. Anyways, we welcome applicants from U.S., local, and regional jurisdictions that are just committed to piloting, launching, or expanding their alternative 911 emergency response teams in the upcoming year.
Okay.
But you should definitely just visit our website to learn more. You can check us out on LinkedIn or Twitter. Just search again Harvard Kennedy School Government Performance Lab. If you have more specific questions about the application, we actually did just an optional informational webinar that was recorded and posted on our website. So I answer a bunch of just common questions about the application. It's super short. I think it's like 15 to 20 minutes long. So you can check that out too.
And how do you prioritize who is selected? Is there a requirement list or a rubric that you're using to make those decisions?
Yeah, so I think it anchors on what I mentioned a little bit earlier, but again, it's making sure that your plan is to staff unarmed responders, that you want to dispatch directly from 911 and send those 911 calls to teams, that you are demonstrating cross-agency and community stakeholder collaboration, and the last again is that you have a strong commitment to advancing equitable outcomes for communities of color and folks disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. I think apart from that, we're open to reading all applications with an open mind.
And for our listeners, we will have links to all of this on the show notes for this episode. We'll also make sure that when we share out this episode on social media, we link back to the Government Performance Lab and the application, the cohort application. So tell us, what is next for you in 2023?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious is that I'm excited to read through all of our new applications in the next couple of months. Yeah, it's always so cool to hear what everyone is working on and to see just the momentum keep growing and growing every year that we've done this. So that's always very exciting. And then we're also growing our team in the initiative. So I'm super, super pumped to just get to know them, start the onboarding and training, and build relationships with new people. I feel like I always learn so much from my colleagues, and I'm always in awe of the work that my team does with governments and sort of everything we're able to accomplish. So I'm just excited for these new group of hires to really contribute to the team culture and to teach us whatever it is that they're expert in to make our team better.
And a question that we ask as we begin to wrap up every episode, why local government? Why do you work in public service?
Yeah. So for me, from an early age, I've just always wanted a job where I would be able to help folks in need. And I think that government, when it's well functioning, has a really great potential to do that. And I think especially local government, it really gives us the opportunity to tailor solutions to specific community needs and I think that's the piece that attracts me the most to this level of government, the closeness to the community and the people.
I love it. You're speaking to the GovLove heart. So thank you for that. Our true last question for you, if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as our exit music for this episode?
I love this question. But I would pick a song called El Viejo del Sombrerón by La Sonora Dinamita. And that would be to honor my parents in my journey. I think they've taught me to never forget to have fun, to take some time to dance and enjoy the moment. And this song specifically reminds me of my parents dancing together. And that brings me a lot of joy. So I hope it does for you too.
I love it. And joy is a pillar of the ELGL mission. So thank you for reminding us to seek joy in all of our work. But most importantly, thank you for coming on and sharing all of this great information with me today.
Yeah, of course. It was a pleasure to be here.
GovLove is produced by a rotating cast of ELGL volunteers. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. You can reach the GovLove podcast on Twitter at GovLove Podcast. I hope to see all of you at the Code for America Summit coming up soon in May. Head over to codeforamerica.org to register for this once-a-year event, this year hosted in Washington, D.C., and featuring more great sessions like this episode. Thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government. Ese viejo si es de buena, el viejo de sombrerón.